Anger isn't just an emotion, it's a protective response. When a child grows up in unpredictable or emotionally unsafe environments, the nervous system adapts. You either become hypervigilant, constantly scanning the room for danger, or you shut down to survive, or you suppress your emotions so you don't trigger anyone else. And if anger wasn't modeled in a healthy way, you don't learn how to feel it safely. You only learn two options. You suppress it or you explode with it. And that's not personality, that's conditioning. And conditioning can be rewired. But first, it has to be seen.
Om Namah Shivaya, 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 Om Namah.
Good day, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Break the Cycles with me, Alicia Cherie. Today we're talking about generational anger, anger as inheritance. Because anger didn't start with you, but it may have moved through you. And awareness is where it finally meets interruption.
Hey, Soul Sister. Before we dive in, make sure you followed and subscribed to this podcast so you never miss the next drop of healing energy. And I want to hear from you. Leave a comment or some feedback. Let me know what's been resonating with you and what topics you want me to cover in future episodes. Your voice helps me shape this space for our community. Also, if something in this episode speaks to your spirit, share it with a friend, a sister, or anyone who's walking their own healing journey. Because together, we're not just healing, we're evolving, expanding, and reclaiming our power. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Many of us grow up believing our emotional reactions are simply part of who we are. We say things like, I just have a temper. That's just how my family is. That's just my personality. But when we slow down long enough to look honestly, we start to see something deeper. What we thought was personality may actually be pattern. And patterns often live inside families for generations until someone becomes aware enough to question them. When I look back now, I can see that anger didn't show up randomly in my life. It followed very specific paths through my family. On my dad's side, anger was present. And it started with my grandfather, who was extremely strict, very emotionally unavailable. He ruled the household with control and authority. And affection wasn't part of the environment. My dad and his siblings grew up in a home where emotions weren't welcomed. My grandfather also treated my grandmother with anger. He was a womanizer. And their relationship carried a lot of tension and instability. There wasn't emotional safety in that house. So what my dad learned growing up was simple. Emotions weren't something you processed. They were something you suppressed until they erupted. That's exactly what I witnessed in my own home. I saw my dad lash out, throw things, hit things, yell. Anger was loud, forceful, unpredictable. And when you're a child, unpredictability doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels unsafe. A child's nervous system is constantly asking one question: am I safe here? And when anger is explosive, the nervous system learns to stay alert, always watching, always scanning, always prepared. But on my mom's side, the pattern looked different. Instead of anger being the main expression, there was a lot of addiction, drugs, alcohol, escaping emotional pain through substances. My mom struggled with mental illness. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, anxiety disorder, and carried a lot of emotional pain in her life. She also experienced toxic relationships that added even more instability. And when anger showed up for her, it didn't explode outwardly the same way. It showed up in her body. I remember her toes cramping. I remember seeing tension physically take over her. And instead of expressing the anger, she would shift into another personality, a little girl named Cece. She was around 8 or 9 years old. It was just as crazy as it sounds because seeing this as a little girl, I was so scared and confused, but I finally accepted it as my norm. Honestly, I would rather see my mom as Cece, but overall, that was her system's way of coping. On one side of my family, anger was explosive. On the other side, pain was numbed through addiction. But on both sides, something very important was missing: healthy emotional expression. Whether anger was exploding or pain was being numbed, emotions were still being suppressed. Suppression became the real generational pattern running through both sides of the family. Anger isn't just an emotion, it's a protective response. When a child grows up in unpredictable or emotionally unsafe environments, the nervous system adapts. You either become hypervigilant, constantly scanning the room, or you shut down to survive. Or you suppress your emotions so you don't trigger anyone else. And if anger wasn't modeled in a healthy way, you don't learn how to feel it safely. You suppress it or you explode with it. And that's not personality, that's conditioning. And conditioning can be rewired. But first, it has to be seen. I suppressed. I became careful, hyper aware. I monitored rooms, people's tone, their energy. I learned to read the emotional temperature of a space before I even spoke. It felt risky. At my grandparents' house, we weren't allowed to be loud. If we laughed too much, we were told to be quiet. So I internalized something dangerous at a very young age. My expression was disruptive. My emotions were too much. So I silenced myself. It showed up in moments where I should have been able to speak up, but I didn't. There were times adults betrayed me, people who were supposed to love me, protect me, and create safety for me, but they couldn't. Many of them weren't in the right mental or emotional state themselves. Instead of expressing how that hurt me, I held it in. I downplayed my feelings. I didn't want to hurt my mom's feelings when I was upset that we had no food in the house, or when I would come home and the lights were shut off because she spent the money on her addiction. I didn't want to hurt my dad's feelings when he exploded in anger. His reactions made me feel unsafe, so I kept it inside. All of it. The disappointment, the fear, the anger. And when you're a child, you don't always realize what you're doing. You just think, I don't want to make things worse. So you carry it quietly. But suppressed anger doesn't just disappear. It stores in the body, the jaw, and the shoulders, and the stomach, and the chest. And when anger stays stored long enough, eventually it's going to find a way out. So I started coping through substances very young, around the age of 10. I was smoking cigarettes, smoking weed, and drinking alcohol. And at the time, it didn't feel shocking because of the environment I was in. It felt normal. It felt like an escape. It felt like relief from everything I was holding inside. But when I reached my teenage years, things escalated. The anger stored in my body started coming out more intensely. I started yelling more, reacting more. I would cry because the emotions felt too overwhelming to contain. I started having panic attacks. My body would shake. There were moments where the rage inside of me felt so strong that I wanted to hurt someone. Not because I was evil, but because I was overloaded. Years of suppressed emotion had built up in my nervous system. And eventually, it spilled over. By my teenage years, anger had become my baseline. I was irritated all the time. I cursed constantly. I was on edge. Everything felt like it could set me off. I started experimenting with other drugs, ecstasy, cocaine, pills, anything that would numb the emotions I didn't know how to process. I stayed away from home as much as possible, not because I wanted to rebel, but because I was trying to escape environments that felt emotionally overwhelming. So when people look at teenagers and label them as rebellious, sometimes what they're actually looking at is a nervous system trying to survive. I wasn't rebelling, I was numbing. When anger is held in the body for years, it doesn't disappear. The nervous system stores unfinished emotional experiences. That's why some of you feel tightness in your chest when someone raises their voice, or your jaw clenches when you feel disrespected, or you just go from 0 to 100 over something so small. Your body isn't overreacting. If you grew up around explosive anger, your nervous system might react quickly because it learned anger equals danger. If you grew up around suppressed anger, you might struggle to express frustration until it leaks out sideways. Neither response makes you broken, it makes you adapt. It's your norm. But adaptation is not the same as alignment. Healing begins when you start choosing responses that align with you, not just how you learn to survive. Anger followed me into adulthood. In my career, I was vocal, direct, sometimes aggressive, but underneath it was detachment. Anger turned into control, shutdown. It turned into hyper independence. It turned into people pleasing. And then it showed up in my parenthood. There were times I didn't give my child space to feel her emotions. I reacted. I yelled. I was short tempered. I cursed constantly around my kids. I was repeating the pattern because that's how much anger was living in my nervous system. And one of the hardest realizations I had to face was this: I was repeating what I had experienced. I was repeating the toxic generational cycle. If you don't process generational anger, you pass it on. It's simple. Maybe not in the same dramatic form, but in tone and reactivity and emotional availability, and how safe your home feels. Cycle breaking isn't about perfection, it's about awareness. Because anger itself isn't the problem, unconscious anger is. So, how do you break the cycle? First, name what you witnessed. Ask yourself, what did anger look like in my home? Was it loud, silent, manipulative, violent, passive? Second, locate it in your body. Where do you feel activation? In your chest? In your jaw? Maybe your stomach? Maybe your shoulders? Your body is the doorway to healing it. Third, practice the pause. Reaction is immediate. Response includes space. Fourth, repair. If you yell at your child, you go back and say, that wasn't about you. I'm working on responding better. Repair breaks cycles, not perfection. And finally, regulate consistently. This is not a one and done. Consistently, movement, breathing, journaling, therapy, enforce boundaries. Regulation is maintenance. It's daily work. Some of you listening think, I'm not angry. But are you irritable? Are you impatient? Are you emotionally unavailable? Or quick to judge? Quick to withdraw? Because sometimes anger disguises itself as control, as sarcasm, as independence, as people pleasing, as I just have a strong personality. Anger isn't always loud. Sometimes it's armor. And the real question isn't, am I angry? It's, what is my anger protecting? That's getting to the root. Or is this about something older? Because that question builds awareness. And that is the first phase in your healing journey. That's what builds the freedom.
If you've been listening to this and realizing that you keep repeating the same patterns, I want you to understand this is not by accident. Your nervous system learned what felt safe, even if it's no longer serving you. And you can't force yourself out of that with more discipline. You have to start by creating safety in the body. And that's exactly why I created my Break the Cycles reset. That includes a guided meditation, 2 breathing techniques that I walk you through step by step. I include affirmations and journaling prompts to help you actually integrate what you're learning. So this isn't just something you listen to, it's something you move through. If you're ready,
In closing, I want to do a somatic breathing practice with you. Place one hand on your chest and one on your belly. Inhale for 4. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. Again, inhale for 4. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. Let your shoulders drop. Say quietly, my emotions are valid and allowed. I can feel anger without being consumed by it. Healing generational anger isn't about blaming where you came from. It's about choosing what you carry forward. The cycle stops where awareness begins, not where perfection begins. Not where you never get angry again. Emotions are always going to be a part of our life. It's not where you never raise your voice again. It stops the moment you say, I see this pattern and I'm choosing differently. Your children don't need a flawless parent. They need a parent who can pause, who can apologize, who can regulate, who can model growth. And your partner doesn't need someone who never gets triggered. That'd be too easy. They need someone who takes responsibility. And you don't need to erase your anger. You need to understand it. Because anger is protective energy. It just needs direction. The woman before you survived. You are here to transform. That's what legacy looks like. Until next time, stay aware, stay intentional, and keep breaking cycles.
Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya.